Welcome to Inspired Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower men in a positive way, designed to educate, empower, and inspire even the busiest individual on the go over that first cup of coffee. Please join me in welcoming Gunter, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Yep, I'm back. I've been missing in action for the last couple of weeks, and boy, what a difference 2-3 weeks can make in terms of not just my individual life, but in the life of the whole planet. Yep, I'm talking about dealing with the pandemic. Now, there's been a couple of reasons why I've been absent, and I actually haven't really made any social media comments or just comments in general about my thoughts and feelings about the pandemic and how to cope, because there's been such a flood of information into the digital space that I needed to sit back and actually take a little bit of stock about where do I want to, in essence, begin to address this and provide the people that I have contact with support. And part of that has been actually sitting and listening to my clients and hearing what it is that's coming up for them in this particular time. I also want to use this particular podcast from a perspective of things happen in our lives during a time like this, which even though in the beginning we don't think are stressful, are in fact stressful. I'll give you a good example. It's always been planned that we're going to do full 1-hour meaningful conversations around a particular topic with myself and 2 others. Now, we had the first recording planned for yesterday afternoon, but in the meantime, the day before, our Prime Minister basically said you can only have 2 people at any one time meeting. Now, essentially, we were talking about 3 people plus one who was going to do the technical side of the podcast. So when my friend who's running the studio contacted me and said, listen, what do you want to do? I went, well, there's only one thing to do, and that is that we need to comply fundamentally with what is required, and that is to pursue the rules around social isolation. So we're now looking, interestingly enough, at alternatives to do this in a different way. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because a large part of that conversation is firstly about inspiring change, but also thinking about what it is that we want to change during a time of such a thing as a pandemic and what that change should influence after that pandemic. So that's going to be coming up. Right now, I don't know exactly what and when that will be, but it won't be too long. Again, the whole idea is that we stay connected, whether that's, through social media, through emails, through letter writing, whatever it is. Contact for human beings is really, really important. So let me give a little bit of a brief about what's been coming up. So a lot of stuff that people are dealing with is the stress of suddenly feeling they're not entirely in control of themselves and how they live and how they want to live. And any sort of sense of disempowerment is highly, highly stressful, and for a lot of people will make them by definition anxious. So I started off saying that there's been an absolute flood of information into the virtual media world and onto the news and so on. Some of that information has been really, really conflicting. And I get somewhat angry with that because amidst it all is some serious misinformation being promoted. And that includes coming from political leadership and also people who believe that they have a significant level of influence over others. So I've got a simple message on that level. For those people who want to believe in conspiracy theories, who've got weird and wacky and wonderful ideas about, what the COVID-19 is about and how we should deal with it, unless it's factual and comes from a scientific perspective, my suggestion is keep your mouth shut. This is not the time to sow conflicting information into the population. We need to stay focused, okay? So the first thing is, if you're going to open your mouth, learn the facts. And that's one of the things that I wanted to do before I started to step into this space. And like everything, not all of us are trained as scientists. So working through and critically analysing information and, thinking about what we're being told and whether that's true or not, and, is it coming from a Russian bot? All that sort of stuff is not helpful. Okay, so my suggestion is stick to the reputable professional sites like the World Health Organization, the CDC, health professional websites, like in my case, it's the Australian Psychological Society. We've put out a fantastic brochure on that I think is really encompassing and useful. Obviously takes into account the psychological aspects and not so much the medical. But again, we can put those things together if we keep a sensible mind together. So from that platform, I think the next step is that we really need to think about this from the perspective of keeping it in perspective. It's very easy to get caught up in a sense of mass anxiety and in some instances mass hysteria. You got to remember that the media is used to clickbaits, sound bites, stuff that will get people's attention because they want readership, and any readership is money. So it's a saleable commodity. Is that entirely useful at a time when we need to stick with facts and reason and logic and objectivity? Not really. They're a little bit at odds because, some of the stuff that we want to read comes from a very subjective space and often involves certain opinions. And we get this especially from shock jocks and, particular type of TV stations. And I'm not going to go into that. Anyone who's been keeping a track of the media over the last few years will know, where we can draw reasonable, sensible information from and where we need to just take it with a grain of salt because they're spinning a yarn that's, politically oriented. And one of the things that I get really, really angry about is that, many people are politicizing this whole situation with this pandemic. And that is just, in my view, disgusting. This should be a bipartisan approach. And we should include people to work on, solving the issues. So keep perspective is very, very important. Think about what you're reading. Think about what you're hearing. And most of all, think about what you're saying. There are reasons for why many of the rules have been put in place. And in some respects, disease transmission is fundamentally a numbers game. And we know that if we get control of how that transmission process works, we can have a major impact on how long we're going to have to deal with this. Because ultimately, my understanding is, and history tells us, that epidemics and pandemics have a beginning and they have an end. And we need to stay on top of what helps us come towards the end and how to deal with that. And the other thing is, we really need to get a handle on learning from the experience. What is it that we can take out? And unfortunately, history tells us that if we don't learn from it, we are condemned to repeat it. And that goes for everybody. It's not just the individual, it's businesses, it's communities, it's politicians. And at the moment, we really need a leadership that is willing to put aside partisan issues. So on an individual basis, what does keeping things in perspective mean? Well, the question that I pose to people is, if you're getting very, very distressed, what is it that you're telling yourself? What is the story that's running through your head? Now, here's the thing. When we get stressed, we naturally begin to think more negatively, think more pessimistically, and a lot of times we catastrophize. So the question you need to ask yourself is, am I doing that? Am I actually getting ahead of myself and turning this situation on that I'm experiencing right here and now into something that isn't yet and may never be? So, we also need to be sensible. So, for example, if I'm in a vulnerable age group, and one of the shocking things that I got out of this was, when I went to my GP, he pointed out to me that I was in a high risk category. And I was stunned. I thought, what? And then he, explained it. And that is that I've been having, for various reasons, antibiotics since the beginning of probably November, I think, if I go back to it. So my body has been fighting off infections for a long period of time. Now I'm getting over it, I'm getting on top of it, but the last thing I need is, to be exposed to a very virulent virus that has dramatic impacts like the coronavirus has. So I need to be sensible. Am I still working? Yes, I am. Do I screen my clients? Absolutely. Do I do some video conferencing? Yes. Do I see some clients face to face? Yes, if they've been screened. Do I sometimes get a little bit anxious? Yeah, I do. I was particularly concerned that in my particular area that I live in, people were being very casual about social isolation. And in fact, one of the problems that we have is that on the northern beaches in New South Wales, we're actually one of the highest infection rates from the community in Australia. So I think, I have reason to be somewhat anxious. Do I allow that to get out of control? No. And so it's about really then taking some precautions, both practically but also psychologically. We've got an old saying that comes from Hamlet, which is that things are neither good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. So I really want to check in with myself about what story am I telling myself that fundamentally is not useful. So the message in that is that I need to manage my emotions through the way that I think, my beliefs, my perspectives on things, my biases around stuff, so that I can monitor my stress levels. Remember, we're talking about something that attacks, our system when our immune system is not powered up. So the question is, how do I keep my immune system going? Well, firstly, on a very practical level, physically, make sure you get good sleep. Do some exercise. Do some relaxation. Have some social connections. Watch nutrition. Really get into a habit of, eating well. One of the big issues is that it appears that right now, when people are working from home, their alcohol consumption is going up. People who are not working from home but are confined to home, their alcohol consumption is going up. Alcohol is not good at a time of stress. One, it has a tendency to make us more anxious than what we need to be. And secondly, it has an impact on our immune system, directly and indirectly. So we need to really take a look at that. If you're a smoker, well, I think the horse has bolted. I mean, your lungs, if you've been smoking anything beyond, 5 to 10 years, your lungs are going to be compromised. And this is probably, inevitable in a sense that, not that you're going to get sick with the virus, but that you are in a more risk environment, even though you might be younger, like 35 or, even 30. So, smoking, again, is also not good. The other thing is we need to look at how we're relating to each other, because we're going to be spending a lot of time at home. So self-care needs to move into caring for others. I think one of the big takeouts out of this experience with the pandemic is that the more egocentric, the more I-centric we are as a community, the more difficulty we have in coping with something like an epidemic or a pandemic. We need to be, as Philip Zimbardo talks about, sociocentric. We need to think about each other. I mightn't be in a high risk bracket, but I could infect somebody else who is, vice versa. So that whole thing about really being connected with each other and talking and working things through is really important. We mightn't be able to do it face to face, but these days we've got the technology not to have one-on-ones, but having group chats, Zoom, Skype, FaceTime. There's probably a whole bunch of other apps around that make that group thing really happen. I know someone who's had a virtual birthday party, people having virtual dinner parties. That's a safe way to stay connected at a time when connection can be really, really risky. Do not, from an emotional basis, try to weather this on your own, holding your feelings in and just going into a state of denial about she'll be right. All of us are feeling the effects in some way or another. So, it's not unreasonable, like, for example, in my case, where somehow I forgot to book in a client and save the appointment, so they turned up when I wasn't there. That's something that's really unusual for me to do. And what it tells me, and so we need to come back to self-awareness, is that I'm a lot more stressed than what I may even be aware of, because I don't have the sort of necessarily physical symptoms that go along with stress that a lot of people get. For me, it's much more in terms of, memory, a little bit of problem solving at times, sometimes being a bit scattered. But the other thing is staying, in essence, energized. I get into a space at times in this situation. It's been happening in the last, week, especially, where I go, you know what, don't feel like doing anything. And I really sometimes just need to accept that, take that time out, take that space and go, you know what, it's okay under the circumstances. You don't need to be at 100% all the time. So, in essence, one of the things that's coming up for me is that I potentially see stuff that we can take out of this that's actually really constructive. Spending more time with self and learning how to be rather than constantly doing stuff. Looking at my relationships and how I can enhance those. Yep, there is going to be a time when this is finished and probably divorce rates are going to go up, and that's really sad. But at the same time, as someone else pointed out to me, boy, there's going to be a baby boom after this sucker. And that's probably really true. So as a dad, you get an opportunity that you're not commuting to your job, you're working from home, which gives you that extra little bit of time to spend with yourself, your family, and certainly, paying attention to some of the kids that you have that may really, really need it. So I'm not talking just about being positive. I'm still talking about, let's be rational, let's be logical about this, and let's acknowledge that we're all going through some negative feelings, and rather than either denying them or suppressing or repressing them, let's work with them. It's natural. Are you having a bit of difficulty sleeping? Some of us will do. Some of us will have weird dreams, bad dreams. It's about working it through. These are signals that our system is giving to us to reflect, to think about being more flexible. One of the things that this is waking me up to is I have a tendency to get a little bit overly structured. Breakfast happens at this time, then I have this, then I have that. This has shaken that up a little bit. And as much as I've resisted it and sort of felt a little bit uncomfortable with it at times and a little bit stressed, I think it's a useful experience for me to have, because it also teaches me and gets me in touch with remembering what my clients are going through, so I can be much, much more empathic. A lot of people have become quite sort of, well, just get on with it. And like with any health issue, whether it's physical or mental health, it may not be that easy. So for all of us, let's not get too judgy about each other. Let's not, get caught up with the shoulds, musts, and have tos. But let's be compassionate and tolerant at a time where we really need it for both ourselves and others. Till next time, have a think about what I've spoken about and take care. Stay safe and be healthy.
Thank you, Gunter, and thank you to our listeners. Inspired Change with Gunter Swoboda. Please join us every Wednesday for a new broadcast by visiting www.spreaker.com/show/inspire-change, which will feature all the ways you can listen. If you have comments or suggestions, email producer@studio3hollywood.net. Thank you and have an inspiring day.